Boa tarde, então, em nome da direção da Cinemateca, as boas-vindas a todos a este debate em torno de Derek Jarman and the Last of England, que vai ser moderado pelo João Ferreira, diretor do Correio de Lisboa, que vai apresentar os convidados. Quero lembrar que o debate será feito inteiramente em inglês, sem tradução, e que vai dar 1 hora e pouco, porque é 7 no máximo, temos que encerrar. João, por isso.
Olá, em primeiro lugar quero agradecer à Cinemateca, à direção Cinemateca, José Manuel Costa e Rui Machado por nos receberem mais esta edição do festival. E é um grande prazer termos aqui este debate integrado no ciclo, na retrospectiva Derek Jarman and the Last of England. And now, switching to English, I want to thank, of course, the presence of our guests here today, Keith Collins, John Scarlett-Davis, James Mackay and William Fowler. We're being streamed live today, and this is being recorded, so it's nice that we're going to have a register of this conversation and of this retrospective. So we're basically going to chat a little about Jarman and his work, your relation to Jarman. Yeah, so that's let's start with James. Yes.
Yeah. Okay.
So let's just
I have to do something. Yes, press this.
Okay. So well, just as a first question, when did you first get acquainted with Jarman's work, and when did you actually meet him and started working with him on what projects?
Okay. The first thing I saw of Derek's, I think was probably either In the Shadow of the Sun or one of the elements of In the Shadow of the Sun at an expanded cinema event at the ICA, Institute of Contemporary Arts in London. I think it was 1974, I think it was 1974, it might be 1975, I can't quite remember. I'm pretty sure it was the ICA, although somebody said it might be in the Hayward. But those days are kind of misty. Then I saw Sebastian. I remember seeing Sebastian with my college friends. We all went to the screen in Notting Hill Gate. That was a big film. I mean, it had quite an impact, especially amongst young people. I think it played for months in Notting Hill. And then after that, I saw Jubilee when it came out. So I was quite familiar with the feature films, and I knew he made some more abstract film. And then by that time, by the late 70s, 78, 79, I was running programming the cinema at the London Filmmakers Cooperative, and my colleague there, Felicity Sparrow, suggested that I asked Derek to come and show his Super 8 films. I knew he made Super 8 films, but I didn't realise the extent of his work in Super 8, and so I contacted him. That's how I met him. I rang him up, and he said that he would do it. He wasn't that keen on showing the films because they'd been shown quite a lot and they were quite fragile. Super 8's quite a fragile medium. He's basically showing the original film that went through the camera. And he came to the co-op. We did a double bill, like instead of doing 2 different filmmakers on one night, we just did one 2-part session with Derek, and he showed, he must have shown at least 20 odd films in that time. He came with the films, his own projectors, and a cassette machine, and he had a stack of audio cassettes, different kinds of music, and he would play the films a bit like, I suppose, a DJ plays records. He'd talk and introduce each film, and then he'd pick the next film as it suited him. There was no fixed sequence. And then he had music which he played along with the films. They weren't edited to music, and they didn't have music on them, but he had various music from Walton to Tangerine Dream, which he played with each film. A fascinating, brilliant evening. So that's how I met Derek, and then at the end of the evening were talking about the problems of Super 8 and its fragility. So there were quite a few people. I went to art college with John Maybury and others who are working in Super 8. And the problem is that it's that piece of film that goes through the camera that you project, and it gets damaged very easily. So actually we started working really on conserving the Super 8s, and that was the first project, which culminated with In the Shadow of the Sun. I've been working also programming for the Forum at the Berlin Film Festival, so I knew the people there. I spoke to Sylvia and Grayson, and they put up the money to make a blow-up, 16mm blow-up of In the Shadow of the Sun. It's just under an hour long. Derek would play, at that time he was playing Verdi's Requiem with the film. We couldn't afford to clear those rights, so 6 months before I had put on a concert by Throbbing Gristle at the Film Co-op, and I knew them quite well, Peter Christopherson, and I suggested to Derek that we have Throbbing Gristle do the music for the film. And that worked out quite well. They also, at the same time, they actually released the single Stormy Weather from The Tempest, because Derek and his producers for that film were looking at some place to have it, someone to release it, and they couldn't find a record company. And so Industrial Records released that track, which was rather good. Yes, that's it.
John, you worked with Jarman, and you had a small role in Sebastian, and then you worked with him directly in The Tempest. Can you tell us a bit about that? Well, that first experience, the first feature, Sebastian, and then the experience more on the other side of the camera, working directly with Jarman in The Tempest. So we're still talking about the late 70s.
Absolutely. A long time ago, the late 70s actually. But it was in fact the middle of the 70s, it was 75, when I first met Derek. And I was quite very young then, and in a gay club in Earl's Court in London. And I was literally scouted by somebody looking for sort of pretty young men who wanted to be in an orgy scene. They didn't mention the word orgy actually, they just said a scene in a film that had been shot out in Sicily. And they were shooting a scene in London, because essentially when they finished editing the whole of the movie, Sebastian, they didn't actually have enough to actually constitute it as being a full-time feature film, so they were short. So Derek invited all his friends over to the studio above his in Butler's Walk, which is on the Thames. And I turned up there in the morning with a lot of other pretty boys, and lots of pretty boys as well. And the first thing we had to do was take all our clothes off and dance around Lindsay Kemp, the choreographer, who was wearing a giant dildo strapped to his waist, basically an enormous phallus, which was about sort of a foot and a half long. I had no acting experience, no dancing experience, and it was quite a nerve-wracking time for me. I got used to it and spent the whole day naked, actually. And Derek came around and cheered us all up. We were quite hungry. He was giving us drinks and things. And I was most impressed by watching this man wearing his boiler suit, his blue boiler suit, which he wore during all this filmmaking, actually. And it was just such an exciting time. Forgot all about it, and then got invited to the premiere, which James just mentioned, in Notting Hill Gate. And in fact, the film ran for, I think it was about 16 weeks, which is a really long time, which is unheard of for any film, and completely a massive audience for this kind of film. I think Derek targeted it towards a gay audience, although anybody can see it and really enjoy it. And then after that I started, he asked me to work on a pop video for Marianne Faithfull for Broken English. By then I'd achieved my dream of getting into the film industry, and I was working in a film library, a famous film library called Biz News in West London. And Derek asked me to collate as much war footage together to go as an accompaniment for Marianne Faithfull's song Broken English, which I did. And I worked on all the other segments of that video with him. Had such a great time. But he asked me back to work on, subsequently on the templates. By then I was an assistant director and I was working on major films like Star Wars and things. And it was such a relief to work on a low-budget film, which wasn't sort of racked with the institutional homophobia in the film industry at the time was pretty awful. And to be surrounded by like-minded people and in such a creative environment, it was just a terrific experience for me. And especially since we filmed it all in a semi-derelict stately home called Stoney Abbey up in the Midlands. And it was a really exciting time. I was Derek's assistant director, and basically I was there to sort of keep the scenes rolling on the sort of the floor of the studio as such as it was, and make sure everything went well. But most of all, I was there to look after Derek and keep him from being distracted by all the things that were going on around him, so he could concentrate on his work. And it was just a totally thrilling time, especially when actually we were filming in the depths of winter, and the scene in The Tempest at the very end. I don't know how many of you have seen this, with the sailor boys who were dancing around. It was just for this celebration scene, and for the song Stormy Weather. They were bussed up, just like I was actually literally bussed onto Derek's first film, Sebastian. They were bussed up from gay clubs in London, all those boys. And as soon as they arrived, we were supposed to be there for 2 days. There was a snowstorm, and they were stuck there for a whole week, basically. Which was Derek's dream, to be stuck in this staging home, this beautiful place with all these lovely lads. And we had to work, so everybody else was having a wild time, but we had to work. And I then, after the Tempest, I was privileged to help work on a film that never actually happened, called Neutron. And I was working with him on that one, script development, and meeting various actors who were supposed to be in the film for about 6 months. And then by then, by then my own film career had taken off, and I was making my own pop videos, and I was still, it doesn't like me that much, does it? I was editing Derek's pop videos. I edited about half a dozen of them for him, and subsequently became my own independent filmmaker as myself, and then didn't actually work with Derek again, but remained very much an incredibly close friend.
Thank you, John. Okay, now more the same question.
It's no.
Okay.
Any one of you has a cell phone?
Mobile phone, é uma voz.
It's one here, but it's on silent. Shall I turn it off?
Yeah, turn it off.
Bloody Apple is not live. Okay. Also, the same question: how did you get to meet Jarman, and as first started also working with him, collaborating with Jarman? Logistics here.
Okay. I first found out about Derek because one of my closest friends, another schoolboy, said there's an all-male screening of Sebastian in Newcastle one time, and we're going to go and see it. And we left school, we were teenagers, we left school, got changed from our school uniforms into civilian clothes in a public lavatory in a shopping centre, and snuck into the cinema, trying to be as old as we can. I'm fairly sure that I had bum fluff on my top lip, and I stolen some of my mother's mascara and coloured in to make me look a bit older, to make me look like I'd get through the door. And in the middle of, we were watching this film, it was astonishing for us, it was a revelation. Out of the corner of my eye, something twitched. And I thought, oh my God. I said to my friend, oh, I said, the man next to me, he's got an erection. And he said, everyone in the bloody cinema's got an erection. And so that's how I first encountered the work of Derek. Many years later, Newcastle upon Tyne, they had a lesbian and gay, very famous at the time, lesbian and gay film festival that attracted directors from all over the world. We had Bjorn Speck there, Artie Bresson, Gus Van Sant. Derek was there, and I was introduced to Derek. The first thing I said to him was, "Oh hi, is Sean being gay?" And he said, "Oh, Sam's really sorry, he's not. Do you really like him?" And Derek went on the stage to present Imagine October. At the end of Imagine October, I was fairly furious that there was no text on the screen. I have all sorts of cinemas about the visual image, not reading, and it did restrict it to the English world, the English-speaking world. But had a bit of a question-answer discussion, shall we say, with Derek. And that was the end of it. Derek went back to London, I went back to my job. And then the director of the film festival had given Derek my home address. I was furious. And said, "He's trouble, don't get involved with him." But Derek was sending me letters, and I was replying saying, "I'm really busy." And the director of the film festival said, "Look, don't go down to London, because Derek is heavily into S&M. I thought, well, there's no end there, so write it back to sorry, I'm busy for next year, so I can't do that. And then another letter from Derek saying, "I'm making this film, I'll show this to the film director, the director of the film festival." He said, "Don't go down to London. You'll end up chained to the bed." I thought, "Oh my God, what the hell goes on in London?" I was quite an innocent boy at the time. And then Derek sent me another letter saying that, "Come to London, I'm editing this film." He said, "It's the last of being ready." He sent me a lovely Christmas card based on a photo still from it. And I showed this to the director. He said, "Look, don't go down to London. You'll end up in the Black Room." I thought, my God, what is this? Is just crazy. So eventually I phoned Derek. I was coming to London for a job interview and phoned him. And I said, "What have you been doing?" He said, "I've been painting." In the Northeast, that means painting and decorating. For Derek, he was making paintings for his show for the Turner Prize at the Tate Gallery. He said, "There's black paint everywhere." I thought, "Oh my God, the Black Room, it's true." He's getting it ready, especially. So I turned at his front door, curiosity about the bedroom, turned at his front door, and as he opened, I said, "Derek, there's something I'm going to ask you before I cross the threshold. Are you into S&M?" And he went, "Well, no, and I can tell you aren't either, because otherwise you call it SM." And went in, had a lovely time. He was the greatest man. His intelligence was founded in Shakespeare and Chaucer and pop videos, and his breadth and depth and chronology of knowledge was astonishing. I met a genius, and had full-time access to a genius, and wasted a lot of it. We got on great. After a few months, it was kind of whirlwind romance, if you want to call it that. I moved down to London, moved in with him, in a tiny space, 4.5 meters by 5.5 meters. And went to see him editing The Last of England, ended up working on War Requiem, appearing in it, and editing parts of it, appearing in The Garden and helping the editor of that, and looked after him, cared for him. I had hoped I'd spend the rest of my life with him, but he ended up spending the rest of his life with me.
Thanks so much, Keith. William, yesterday we presented a program here with all the series of music videos and the short films from the 80s. At your perspective as a programmer and a researcher of these times and these films, tell us a bit about who the influence that Jarman had. First of all, what's so unique, and then we can talk a little bit about this. What's so unique about Jarman's work, and what was the impact at the time, and what influence did it have? Because also through as Marian Faithful, the music promos, this was before MTV and before the actual music video. So I'd like you to talk a little bit about that. What was it about Jarman's work that created this influence, and who were those other people?
I think what I personally responded to, and I think what you can see in the people that perhaps were either influenced by him or had some kind of creative relationship with him, is this thing, is the way that the work, we think of British filmmaking as having this kind of realist tradition. I mean, I think it's much more complex than that, but that's often what we're told or what the history would say. But what seems powerful to me is that Derek was subversive and about protest, and about saying what he thought about things, but he was also interested in the imagination and fantasy, and not necessarily about what was exactly happening in front of the camera. So, the kind of metaphysical interiors, about the occult, about the long versions of history, about rewriting how we think about history, but yet at the same time continually wanting to link it to the current realities in some way. So that kind of almost paradoxical relationship, I think, is something that I personally sort of responded to. And I think that sense of the plasticity of the image and fantasy and kind of colour having emotional resonance, all these kind of things, I think fed into this new wave of filmmaking, if you can call it that, in the very late 70s, and in a way through the 80s, the 80s aesthetic of the plastic image and kind of colour and vibrancy and the image not representing reality and representing something else. So the plot yet being this kind of fantastical world. So I think he was extremely important in all that, and then he worked with so many people who sort of became really big pop video directors. John Maybury being kind of a notable example, but several other people as well, and John as well. So there's a very powerful connection. The work, and I think all those things are why his work resonates so much now as well.
Yeah. John, maybe you can also talk a little bit about this. Yeah, also, we showed your film, Chat Wrap here. How was? Tell us a bit about what was the atmosphere in those times, and also where were your movies shown, and where did they screen? What was the circulation of these works? And
Well, most of the screenings were taking place in small independent cinemas, like James mentioned, the ICA, and various galleries and installations. Sometimes they were in people's lofts, and we had sort of just guest audiences coming along. Nobody particularly had to pay or anything. And there was no real outlet for this work, and we were very privileged to be able to have our films being picked up literally by the galleries that were sort of specialising in kind of more obscure independent stuff rather than the mainstream. This was going to happen much later. It took quite a few years before video art and Super 8 and Derek's work was seen in the really big galleries. And it was the atmosphere. It was very low key, very, very, very rough. We used to, it was quite a small scene. I was talking to William about this last night, but at that time, I think in the sort of early 80s, late 70s, there were about 200 people as part of the scene. There was no Facebook or no mobile phones, nothing like that to spread the word anywhere. And we all used to really meet in nightclubs, is when all the information about who was doing what, who was filming this, who needed somebody to work on that, and where you're going to screen something. It was also passed on over drinks, or in a lot of instances sort of drugs as well, believe it or not, So these were clubs, a famous one being Blitz, which was the club that Boy George was the code check person, and Steve Strange ran it. These were mostly gay clubs. And with a mixture of art students, a lot of art students. I was an art student, I'd been to Goldsmiths, and a lot of Derek's friends and John Maybury, they went to St. Martin's and places like that. And we just hang out, basically. Nobody had any money. This is we shared this, everybody shared this, Derek especially. I was working in a Chinese restaurant, and various people were doing this and that. And we just wanted to make films. We were all living quite cheaply. Any money we had was spent on hiring equipment or buying film or what have you like that. It was a particularly bad recession in England at the time, the Conservative government, Margaret Thatcher. I think the fact we were so young, we didn't really mind, we all needed more money, but we didn't feel oppressed in any way. We just got on with what we wanted to do and sharing our art among each other. It was great. It was a great time, very good time. I mean, when you look back at the history of that whole period with all the strikes we had in England, the money strike and everything, the poverty and this and that, and there's some terrible stuff going on all around us. But because of our resilience, the resilience of youth meant we could just sort of rise above it all.
James, you talk me a little bit about this political side you mentioned,
I think that the real thing is that we haven't touched on, but it's really important, is that Derek was an artist. I mean, he was a painter basically, and he started painting when he was very young, when he was a child, and he was exhibiting by the time he reached his teens. And then he went to the slaves. I mean, he didn't pick up a film camera until much later on. Not that he wasn't exposed to film, because both his maternal grandfather and his father were avid filmmakers who had their own 16mm equipment. I think if you look at I mean, Derek worked with Ken Russell as a designer in the late 60s. But if you look at the work that he made himself when he first picked up a camera in 71, 72, he produced, I think if I'm right, 42 films between 1972 and when he boarded Sebastian in 1975. 75 Sebastian. And those films are complete and complex works. I mean, the very first ones are more crude than the final ones, but the amount of effort, the amount of work that he put into them was quite phenomenal. And they also they relate very closely to his painting work. You can see it, I think, in the sketchbooks, and I've tried to insert some of the from his notebooks and some of the paintings into the Super 8 book as well. And I think unless you understand that way that Derek approached film as a painter, that's what makes him stand apart from other, let's say, film directors who are interested. They might be very visual directors, but they're interested primarily in narrative. Derek, I don't think was ever really fundamentally interested in narrative. I think that's something he took on board for his more ambitious projects. As part of the process. I don't think it started like that. I mean, I think if you look at his films, they tend to be viewed from a certain angle, and the director's eye looks at each scene, front on. There's not much in the way, apart from a bit of it in the second we get reverse cutting. The language of film, I think, was fairly alien to Derek, but the language of painting wasn't. So I see that that's what, for me, is unique about Derek in terms of British cinema. He was a painter who made films. Nowadays, an artist who makes film, to take for instance from that Pierre Week, is quite normal and is just seen as a major artist. But in Derek's time, the art world looked down on filmmaking. It was seen as a kind of commercial thing that people maybe dabbled with, but wasn't serious work. And I think Derek struggled to, because he was emerging as a painter quite strongly in the 60s. He struggled to maintain that position in an art world that was very close to people who had success or worked well in cinema or film.
Something I've thought about is, I mean, I agree there's that very much an approach and aesthetic, but also that the making of the films, and often early on the projection ones, whether consciously or unconsciously, had something happening about it as well.
Well, that was his he lived in, I mean, he was one of the first early adopters of living in a warehouse space, and that allowed, as John said, people gathered round and showed each other their work, film work, in that kind of the space that worked really well. And also sometimes looked at other films. So I think happening to different things.
Well, I was sort of thinking, I suppose, in the theatrical sense, of the way that he worked with his friends and collaborators and kind of wanted to involve people, and it kind of extending beyond himself. And then also when he shows the Super 8 work, my understanding was that, the sort of changing the speeds and what you're describing about the kind of DJ element to it, that kind of very much the live being a key part of his film presentation.
Well, yes, live.
Yes. But that was very stressed. It wasn't just like, could vary the way that he would.
Yeah, I mean, those early films were made to be shown in the spaces that he lived in, the gallery spaces. They weren't made to be shown in cinemas. So yes, you're right.
I mean, sort of starting again, talking about the film narrative as such. On The Tempest, I ordered this book from Foyles in London basically it was a how to direct book. And because Derek kept asking me about reverse shots and things like that, how to do this and how to do that, and all the the angles of basically the eyes, when you have more than one person, and the angles of the eyes going from one person to another, where the camera should be, and in reverse and everything. And I remember one morning on the set, really early, about 7 o'clock, we were studying this book, and there were all these diagrams, and there were lines going everywhere, crisscrossing each other. And there was one was where there was the camera, and there was the one after that, and we looked at it, and neither of us could actually work it out, because it's sort of dyslexia. And Derek said, bollocks to this, basically. He said, I'm just going to stick the camera there, put the actors there, and just film it, and then cut it into bits, and that's what we did all the way through the film.
Keith, one of the things that has always fascinated me about Jarman is the house and dungeons and the garden. So I wanted to ask and also this relationship, this mystical side of Jarman, his love for alchemy and all this universe. What did this house mean to Jarman? And I wanted you to speak also a little bit about the process of gardening.
Well, okay. Just before I met Derek's father died, or in between meeting him and Christmas time, Derek's father died, and I left a bequest, quite a lot of money to Derek and Derek's sister. And Derek had always been bad with money his entire life. He'd never had anything in the bank. He always borrowed money and had to turn to very wealthy friends to help him. He lived hand to mouth. And he, in a typical fashion, he decided to blow all this money on a house. And he had previously been to Dungeness filming Bluebells with Tilda Swinton for a shot that ended up in the West of England. And we were driving down one day to get fish and chips. And he said, you know, there's a little black house on the beach here with yellow windows. If ever was for sale, I think I'd have to buy it. And as we drove up, there was a sign outside saying for sale. And Tilda said, right then, Derek, you're going to have to buy it. And we went into the front door. There's a dear old lady answered the door. She had this strange voice. She could have been speech therapist to the Daleks. She said, hello, how are you? And we went in. Derek said, oh, I'd like to buy your house. It was £32,000 in those days, which seemed astonishingly expensive to me, but cheap for the southeast of England. And they looked around. It's a huge nuclear power station, very near to the cottage. Until they said, aren't you worried about the nuclear power station? And this poor lady, she said, me and my husband have lived here for 30 years and it hasn't affected us yet. Until they looked at me, and I was telling her, if we just stare at each other's eyes, don't smirk, don't smile, because we're going to burst out laughing. And we had to leave the room and just move crippled laughter from the garden. And Derek just said, oh, I love your house, can I buy it? Would you take cash? Didn't negotiate, and oddly, because it was a wooden structured house, you couldn't actually get a mortgage on it anyway, so you would have had to raise cash to buy it. So he had been diagnosed as HIV positive. It'd been a huge blow to him. It's something I'm sure he'd known about and imagined he'd had for years. And it's just a confirmation of that. Needed to get out of London, a tiny flat, and the pressures of London weren't conducive to him. He was getting on in his early, in his 50s, and just needed to get out of London and do something more pastoral. And nurturing something, putting in a seed and hoping that you're going to see it grow next year, does give you something natural to look forward to anticipate, and gave him something that gave him great succor and strength. The garden's still there, sometimes not looking as great as it should. Derek would spend all of his spare hours there. He would get up first thing in the morning, wake us all up and annoy us, clumping around these wooden clogs. He'd have to wake us up to go and work in the garden. And he'd say, I found this wonderful thing on the beach. It would take 8 people to drag up this huge piece of wood. And his enthusiasm for the garden was fantastic. And in the way that he always incorporated his paintings and his life into his films, he made James considerable of his film The Garden, about Gethsemane and Eden, partially filmed there, set there. It's an astonishing masterpiece of dream cinema, and the way it interweaves his life in pretty much the same way that The Last of England wove his life. In The Last of England, he's painting in the flat in London, the centre of London. Smashing works that cuts to a smashed pane of glass. In the set, in the location Millennium Mills, which then that pane of glass is incorporated into a later painting. It's an astonishing flow and circling. So, the garden did give him a great deal of strength. Sadly, in his last published diary, he says, something for me is so touching, he says, the garden as pharmacopoeia has failed, because he's hoped that by growing herbs and potions and studying herbals he can somehow cure himself. And realizes it's a moment when he realizes that's not going to happen, he is mortal. And from then on, makes Blue his masterpiece. I would probably say my greatest achievement in my life that will ever be is keeping Derek going long enough to realize Blue. It's truly, it's a film that we talked about for years, I'm sure James was saying. He was slightly poo-pooed by everyone around and saying, go on, Derek, no one says, yeah, all the time. But when we finally saw it, wow, we were all, there's something very special going on here, and very honest, and very painterly. And another lifelong obsession with painterly Pie. We probably would have liked to have made another biopic about it, but would never have managed to get the funding for it. Magic, oh Lord. Well, on the bookshelves was a whole set of The Golden Bough. And when I went to click through it, the pages hadn't been cut, so it had never been read. A beautiful copy of Cornelius Agrippa's On Philosophy, which is used as a prop in The Tempest, I think, and later on used in the pop video, which I think we shot. Sinead O'Connor wrote a script around behind it. And he was fascinated by it, but he was not a black magician. He was not a magician. The magic of Derek was to draw the friends together and coalesce all the ideas and strengths and magic of people around him into a crystallized, solid thought and idea on a piece of film. And he also loved the idea. He hated video, and he just said, it's not the same. The thing that has to happen is the light has to go through the film and then onto the screen into your heart. In a very hermeneutic way, he regarded that as magic. But the true magic was gathering the people together and condensing. He was a condenser of ideas and power into this one thing. Oddly, there's a fantastic piece of footage from the Soviet Union when they were experimenting with psychics. As a piece of completely bogus. I think they released it to scare the CIA that they had psychic warriors, and the CIA didn't, so they wasted millions of pounds on that project. But there's a piece of footage of a woman moving things, the power of light. It's a fantastic piece of footage of a man concentrating all his power, and a light bulb lights in front of him. And Derek, when he was absolutely intensely working, had all of the energy of this man concentrating to light this bulb where it should not.
James, if I'm not mistaken, you, in the presentations and the talks we've had, you mentioned Imagining October and Angelica Conversation as two of Jarman's most groundbreaking films, and two of your favorites were The Last of England and Blue.
Yeah, so the films that I worked on. I mentioned Imagining October and Angelic Conversation because the first films I worked on with Derek, and they were made in a way that was completely liberating, and we made the film as we wanted to make it. There was no interference from outside, so they're very important in that way. They're made in a different way to conventional cinema, but they still work on for the viewer. But I did want to say something else about that. There were two.
No, well, I reminded me because of
what Keith was saying.
Yeah.
I made a documentary about Super 8 filmmaking for Channel 4 in the mid-80s. We interviewed a lot of people. We interviewed Derek. Now, I was using a sound recorder, it's Tony Daw, who is a Super 8 enthusiast, but he's also Steven Spielberg's sound recordist of choice when he's working in the UK, which is most of the time. So top man, and he mic'd up Derek, and he got this sort of low-level buzzing on his pickup, and he couldn't get rid of it. But we thought, something wrong with the equipment. It was a brand new Narborough because it was Tony Dawes, so the equipment companies, everything we got was brand new. So after that, I put it aside and thought about it, and then several years later, there was a German television unit filming, I think Derek's painting at Edward Square, and he'd asked me to go around, and I was there with Derek while I was being interviewed, and they had the same thing. They put a body mic on Derek, and it picked up this kind of low-level buzzing. It's quite interesting, completely unexplained. Sorry, it's always puzzled me. Something, something was happening anyway. And he wasn't a black magician. He was very interested in people like John Dee. He studied that period. That was his period. Before he was allowed to go and study painting at Slade, his father made him pick up a proper degree, and he studied history at King's. And that was his period, and he knew all about it. And John Dee wasn't a black magician, he was a Christian and a very brilliant man. Derek was very taken with him. A lot of his films are influenced by the writings of Dee.
I was...
Sorry, I've been on track with
I'll put us on track again. I wanted you to, because those films that you referred to Last of England and Blue, and I wanted you to talk a little about Blue. How did, also for Keith, how did the idea start? What was the origin of the concept for Blue?
Okay, right. Derek first mentioned Blue to me when we were in Edinburgh in 1986, or 1987, for the premiere of The Last of England. And he said that he was very keen to make a film about Blue, about Eve Klein, and it went from there. And he thought about it. Originally, it was it wasn't really a biopic, but it had biographical elements about the painter Eve Klein and his blue painting. And it evolved bit by bit, like all of Derek's projects did. And I think it only really started to gel quite late on in Derek's life, when he started to lose his sight, and he realised that the film that he wanted to make was about himself. And I think that's the point where it gelled, which was probably in the winter of '92. But at that time I had a long conversation with him, and he was completely settled on the form of the film. And we agreed I would go out and try and raise some money for the film on that basis. So after that point, it didn't change. It was a solid blue screen with text, which Derek would start to extract from his diaries, from his writings, and new pieces that he would put together. And so that was the process of making the film. It was made in the same way as a conventional film, except we did actually shoot. Nicholas Sirota very kindly gave us access to a Eve Klein painting, a blue painting, International Klein Blue, and went to the basement of Tate Britain, and it was wheeled out and filmed on 35mm. But unfortunately, when you actually project it, it has all the texture of the painting, and it doesn't quite look right. It doesn't quite look like Infinity. So we had to look at other ways of creating the blue. So apart from the filming element, the rest of the film was made like a conventional film in post-production when you record sound and voice. There was a lot of work done by, by the sound designer, by the sound editor, and other people where they picked up some amazing stuff. I mean, the announcement at Heathrow, that announcement at Heathrow, it's a very complex soundtrack. Plus there's layers and layers of music on top of that. The whole of the text was read by both John Quinton and Nigel Terry, and then Derek selected which version of each reading he would use. And then it was mixed in the way our film's mixed in Dolby at Dealing Lee. It's a 5-day mix.
Yeah, Derek was often infuriated by mainstream media. He went without television for a very long time. And in the end, we ended up with this tiny little monitor about this big. Sony had made it. It was a fantastic piece of equipment. The screen was this big, but the actual television was that deep. So, a very strange thing. We tried and squint and watch TV on this thing. And he just got infuriated with the news and newscasting. And he said, wouldn't it be great if one night they turned on the news and the newscaster was upside down wearing a clown mask and a clown wig. And he just wanted to mess with people's ideas. But suddenly it's an advert for something completely outrageous, you know. He just would like that, just a tiny little intervention. Wouldn't it be great if people went to the cinema, all expect to see a fantastic film, and then when it's on, it's just one image and one colour all the way, just to infuriate people. Because he was infuriated himself with the politics in Britain at the time, and the chief constable of Manchester giving some horrendous statement about gay people who were swirling in a cesspit of our own devising. And it was almost a revenge. But it was, so we were in Amsterdam at a film festival. I can't remember what we were screening there at the garden, and we went to look at some new clown works, and Derek was blown away by them, just being in the same room as them and staring at them. He got so close to a flat international plane for work. He said it was like looking at infinity. He couldn't tell if it was a million miles from this plane or if it was touching his nose. It was fairly obvious the film was going to happen then. Heaven only knows how James managed to get funding, approaching funding bodies saying we're going to have a completely blank film. It's
something just lost in my face.
Well, I'd imagine, yeah. I'd imagine. It's one of those things you until it was made, you couldn't imagine someone doing such a thing, such a film being made. Maybe you can imagine an experimental film of a completely black film that eventually is scratched to white. And I'm sure that film was made by someone more about history of film will know what that is. But you can't imagine just somebody that's static and one fantastic colour that helps you meditate. We saw it recently screened in IMAX. It was astonishing because it's overwhelming and it envelops you. Your eyes start to see something that a friend told me recently that phosphenes in your eyes. She had a beautiful term for it. She said they're called prisoner's cinema. For my people in confined, social confined, and you see these phosphenes and shapes emerging from nothing. You just think, what's that? So there's a ghostly thing happening, and it's prisoner's cinema as well. But Derek said.
It's got some 10 minutes left. I want to talk a little. Was it very challenging to get them screened at the time, to get them to the audience?
Well, not really, no, because internationally there was a big audience for cinema in those days. I mean, cinema was popular. Derek already, I mean, I'm talking about when I was working with Derek, later on. By the time I started working with Derek, he had an international-ish reputation. He made 3 feature films. His other work was maybe more esoteric, but also known in certain circles. He was one of, in terms of Europe, I mean, he's one of quite a number of filmmakers working in at the edges of cinema and producing interesting and consistent work. So the audiences, I mean, he wasn't a commercial filmmaker, so he wasn't competing with, the American product. But there were cinemas that showed and distributors who distributed what I suppose was an musical art house film. It's a serious cinema throughout Europe, and if you made a film and it was good, distribution wasn't that difficult in those days. Early on, like television didn't really buy those films. That came a bit later in the mid-80s. It started to get involved and you could sell films to television, you could raise television money to finance them. But before that, distributors bought films and distributed them. That happens very little now. I mean, now you might get a really impressive piece of cinema, and in London it might only play for 3 days, or 3 screenings over 3 days, if that. Here's something just goes to video. So there was an audience. There were cinemas, independent cinemas, and there were really good independent distributors who worked very hard to get films to their audience, and there were serious critics as well.
There's a beautiful bit in Steve Woolley's biography, Palace Pictures, where Steve Woolley at the time was running Scarlet Cinema, which is an art cinema where you could see Sebastiani, and then Sarlo would be in a double bill. You know, like Bear of strange, fantastic films, fantastic video of just pure gins, some weird American like Darren films, a truly amazing space. And Steve Woolley said he screened one of Derek's films, and the cinema was full. And Derek was there, really excited because he had found his audience. He had connected with his audience. They were there, and they weren't there just in sort of we've got to see this out of duty, but they were there really wanting to be there.
Having said that, sorry. Having said that, quite the opposite happened in New York when I went with Derek. We flew out there for the opening of the Tempest. And we're having a wonderful time before we go to various parties and receptions and going around all the clubs and meeting all Derek's friends. It was probably one of the best times of my life, actually. And the film opened, and it was full, the audience was pretty full in one cinema in New York. And the next day, the review came out from Vincent Casey in the New York Times, and it was a devastating review. Basically, it was pretty homophobic in places, actually. And the adjectives he used were just so upsetting, and the distributor basically, the film folded, I think a couple of days later, and it had already been taken off by the time we returned to London, so I had Derek sitting next to me on the flight. I'd seen him angry, but I hadn't seen him that depressed, and he was crying for about 2 hours on the flight, and it was just absolutely one of the worst times. It was really, there's nothing you can say to it. It was just his first film that could have made it commercially outside of Britain, and the outlet was there, and it just one man's opinion, and the whole world, Derek's world, fell apart. And it took a long time to recover from that. We all worked so hard, and it was such a well-received film. And subsequently, I was checking out the reviews now the other day on Amazon, actually. And it's getting brilliant reviews now by all sorts of people. And what Derek was doing with the text of Tempest, the play as such, seemed quite radical at times, to cut bits out of it and move this around and do that. But now, nearly every Shakespeare film or television presentation is doing exactly what Derek was doing. So it's just took a long time for that to be recognised.
I have a horrible story to tell you about the cutting of the script. Is that Derek's library at Prospect Cottage, there's over 3,000 books. I did catalogue it once just to see what was there. But before that, a woman contacted me and said she'd been through the BF line. There's no script for the Tempest. She couldn't find a working script. Did I have it? I said, no, I've never seen such a thing. So she went through the film and painstakingly worked out, she transcribed each line and where it came from and searched through the Shakespeare. This is before the internet, this was before Google. This was in 1991, I think. And I'm sure you did it 10 minutes ago. And as I went, finally, she presented this, it was her PhD thesis, she was going to her PhD. As I went through the library, I found this quite nondescript little rubric in the front it said Michael Jarman, which was Derek's real name, his full name, 1960, I think he'd had it at school. And it was the script of Shakespeare's Tempest, and he crossed it out and written in red all the way through it, and written a budget in the back, and I just didn't have the heart to tell this woman that I found the script after she spent so long. I think she spent a year working out exactly where each line and whose line had been transposed to the single form of time. But the layer was politics. I'm so sad to hear, because I only ever saw Derek cry twice, and the fact that he cried all the time is very sad. And I'll tell you that there was a fly past of Lancaster bombers in London. It flew up the Mall to Buckingham Palace. And Derek had a tear in his eye, and it reminded him of his dad, who'd been a pathfinder in the war and had flown Lancaster bombers, and he just said, it's so moving. But he was more moved that all those young men, all that potential had been destroyed. And very much resonant with the times we were going through where there was an incredible potential and a lot of young men, and that potential was being destroyed by HIV and AIDS. It was devastating. It was all the most bright, intelligent, free thinking, and Derek said it's the left-wing people who are going to die because they're the ones who are into free love and are more likely to not going to be prudish. If they're left-wing, they're going to get the part, fuck it in. And they're the ones that are going to go. And the only other time I saw him cry was watching A Night to Remember, which was on TV. And as the Titanic sank, he started crying. And I said, what's the matter? And he said, this is the end of the Age of Eloquence. This is when it all changed, when this ship went down, the resonance of this throughout history. And he was very sad about it, very struck, but I was so sad that he was crying for hours on a plane.
It was vodka, little bottles of vodka. We had about 10 of those, and we smoked 2 packets of cigarettes.
Oh, those were the
yeah, the plagues. He recovered by the time we got back.
Okay.
Well, fine.
He bore a grudge,
yeah.
For the rest of his life.
Just one last question. Well, today, William and James. Today, what are the challenges? What is difficult? How do we recover these films from these times? Where you had this, you did this big program that's been touring also in the UK about the punk and post-punk period. And what's the big challenge to get these films back, to discover them and putting them in circulation again? And also James with Jarman's work, but what have been the challenges?
Well, I think there is an enormous appetite for this work. There's so much amazing films that have been made, and that's perhaps through things like through the internet, where we're starting to get a handle about the things that have slipped through the cracks over the years, and the things that we're told are really good. There's not just them; there's so much more, and I think people realise that now, and so there's a real appetite for that. There's research to be done. I think it's worth. We should be focusing on negative necessarily, but I think it's really important that these films are properly presented. So, the canonical films are regularly revisited and restored and look really good, and that affects how people perceive them and how they've been historically regarded. These lesser-known films, they each one will have its own type of aesthetic. There'll be creative decisions that have informed how they've been made, but it's really important that they're well presented and that integrity of the original vision is followed through. So that's a challenge, and the finance of those to actually make these films look as they should be, and that's a really important thing to do. So it seems strange to maybe focus on the negative, but that would be the challenge, I think. Maybe James might have other views, but I think it's the costs of making sure that people's integrity in these films are seen as they should be, because people do want to see them.
Yeah, I think recently, in terms of the Super 8 films, and not just Derek's, but John Maybury, Cerith Wyn Evans, others, we're basically all artists. I mean, Derek's quite a few artists, John really is an artist, if he got his head around it. The work is now being recognised within the art world, and it is now possible to find the funding to make conservation copies, because previously the only sources of real way of conserving films was through archives, and archives around the world are really overstretched. There are so many films of different kinds, so they have so much on, whereas in the art world there's less moving image work, and so it's becoming more possible to find galleries, museums and private foundations that will help conserve these works. I was very fortunate in that through Isaac Julian I was introduced to the Luna Foundation, who are a Zurich-based art charity, and they put up all the money to transfer all of Derek's Super 8 footage to stay with the art, to digitize it at the highest level. So we know at least it's all properly conserved. The original materials and temperature and humidity controlled storage. The digitization is stored in different formats and in different venues. So it's pretty safe at the moment. And I think that will, you know, as other work becomes recognised within the fine art world, I think that will happen to more and more people's film works especially from the 60s, 70s and 80s. So I think it's pretty hopeful in that way. I think it's more hopeful than it was 20 years ago when we were really scrabbling around trying to find money to make 60mm copies of things, and it was very difficult.
Okay, thank you. This was very quick. Thank you, Pete, John, James, William, Antonio. Obrigado. Thank you very much. We have a small cocktail upstairs afterwards where you can ask questions to all our guests, and we can have a drink now. Muito obrigado a todos. Muito obrigado.